Chronicon Mundi.
Dive deep into history.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is our second installment of the What If series.
That's right.
And today we are really opening a file on what is, I think, probably the most terrifying 2 weeks in human history.
Without a doubt.
The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. We're going to explore what would have happened if it had all gone wrong.
And this isn't just, speculation. Our mission today is a deep dive into some really serious material. We're looking at declassified military documents, climate models, and a very powerful counterfactual analysis from the Gemini platform.
So this is a reconstruction.
It's a forensic reconstruction, yeah. It's based entirely on what we know they could do and what they planned to do back in 1962. It really shows how close the world came to just ending.
And the first thing that just jumps out at you from this analysis is, well, it's chilling. We had this image of the crisis as a chess match, right? Kenny versus Khrushchev, eye to eye.
The great man theory of history.
Exactly. But the sources, they really suggest that we were saved more by just incredible dumb luck than by any kind of brilliant statecraft. The system itself was just primed to fail.
That is the core paradox here. The analysis is pretty clear that a nuclear war probably wouldn't have started with a big thought-out decision in Washington or Moscow.
So not a button press in a bunker.
No, not at all. The real danger, and the report uses this great phrase, was a cascada de inadvertencia.
A cascade of inadvertent.
A cascade of small mistakes,
Yeah.
a tactical error, a communication breakdown, maybe just one stressed-out submarine captain in the Atlantic.
And that would be enough to trigger these incredibly rigid, pre-programmed, catastrophic military plans.
Yes, and once that machine started, you couldn't just turn it off. It was designed to run to completion.
And crucially, you have to throw out everything you think you know about the later Cold War. The idea of MAD, mutually assured destruction, where both sides are in a stable standoff.
That did not exist in 1962. It was a whole different ballgame. The landscape was defined by this profound strategic asymmetry.
Asymmetry is the perfect word. The U.S. had this just overwhelming ability to strike first.
An ability the Soviets just couldn't match. And that creates this incredibly volatile situation. The weaker side, the Soviet Union, they have the biggest incentive to take huge risks and to do it early.
Okay, so let's unpack that imbalance of power, because the numbers themselves they're just staggering.
They really are. It was an imbalance of almost 10-1. I mean, at the height of the crisis, the U.S. had somewhere between, 25 and 27,000 nuclear warheads in its total inventory.
27,000.
And the Soviet Union. Maybe 2,000 or 3,000 total. But even that number it's misleading.
Why is that?
Because the number that really matters is deliverable strategic reach. How many warheads can you actually reliably land on your enemy's mainland?
And on that front, the Soviets were...
They were basically naked. I mean, their main intercontinental ballistic missile, the R-7 Semyorka, they might have had as few as 6 of those ready to go. Maybe 40 on a good day. 6. And they were slow, they were clunky, and they were incredibly vulnerable sitting on those launch pads.
So why were they so slow? I mean, for a strategic weapon, that feels like a fatal flaw.
It was a massive technological problem at the time. The R-7 used these cryogenic liquid fuels, specifically liquid oxygen.
Which you can't just leave in the missile.
No, it's too corrosive, too volatile. You had to fuel it right before launch, and that process took hours. And all the while, these giant missiles are just sitting out in the open on these huge, very visible launch pads.
Just waiting for a U.S. bomber to come along?
Absolutely. It created this baked-in, use-it-or-lose-it mindset for the entire Soviet Strategic Command. If a war starts, you launch everything immediately because nothing will survive a first strike.
Meanwhile, on the American side, you have the Strategic Air Command, SAC, and it was just an operational monster.
A monster is the right word. SAC was the core of American power projection. They had over 1,500 strategic bombers. The B-52 Stratofortress, the older B-47s.
And a lot of these were in the air at all times, right?
Yes. Under the Chrome Dome Alert Program, a certain percentage of the force was airborne 247, ready to go to their targets. And they were carrying these enormous, high-yield thermonuclear bombs, some of them up to 20 megatons.
20 megatons? That's almost impossible to comprehend.
It is. This meant the U.S. could deliver thousands of warheads on target without ever firing a single missile from the ground.
But they did have missiles, a growing force. You mentioned the liquid-fueled ICBMs, the Atlas and the Titan I.
Right, and these were central to the initial U.S. strike plan. The Titan I, for example, it carried a W-53 warhead.
And what was the yield on that?
9 megatons. And, you look at that and think it's just insane overkill. But there was a reason for it.
The inaccuracy.
Exactly. These early missiles were not precise. Their CEP, the circular error probability, which is basically a measure of how close they can land to a target, it was measured in miles, not feet.
So if you can't guarantee you'll hit the target, you just make the explosion big enough to destroy everything for miles around it.
You use a giant hammer. The W-53 was specifically designed to destroy hardened Soviet command bunkers, or just completely obliterate entire urban industrial complexes in a single shot, even if it was off by a mile or two.
And then you have the future of missile technology just starting to come online, the solid-fueled Minuteman IUP.
The Minuteman was the game changer. It could launch in minutes, not hours. But in October of '62, there were maybe only 10 or 20 of them on high alert.
So not a huge factor yet.
Not a huge factor. What was a huge factor and what guaranteed U.S. second strike confidence was the Polaris submarine system.
The ultimate deterrent.
Absolutely. These George Washington-class nuclear subs could hide in the deep ocean, completely undetectable.
And they carried submarine-launched ballistic missiles.
Yes, each with a 600-kiloton warhead. So even if, by some miracle, the Soviets managed to wipe out every bomber and every ICBM in the U.S., these subs guaranteed that America could still retaliate with hundreds of city-killing weapons. There was no way for the Soviets to win.
So with this massive disadvantage, if the Soviets are going to fight back, what's their best shot? What's their most powerful, reliable weapon?
It's not their ICBMs. It's their regional missiles. They had hundreds of very reliable medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles, the R-12s and R-14s.
And these were all aimed at
Western Europe. Every single one of them.
So their main defense against an American attack on the homeland was to annihilate America's NATO allies.
That was their nuclear hostage. The sources are really clear on this. In any general war scenario, the Soviets' first, most effective, and most overwhelming response would be the complete and total destruction of London, Paris, Bonn, and every single U.S. military base across the European continent.
So strategically, Europe was guaranteed to be destroyed first.
Pulverized. It was a tripwire and the hostage all in one.
Which brings us to the American plan, the document that governed all of this, SIOP 62. The Single Integrated Operational Plan.
Yes, and this is where that rigidity we talked about becomes just terrifyingly real.
What do you mean?
SIOP 62 was a document of pure, mechanical, automated destruction. The analysis shows it had no options for a limited strike, no warning shots, there were no off-ramps.
So it was an on-off switch.
It was an all-or-nothing switch for a single massive spasm attack designed to utterly destroy the enemy state in one go.
What was the scale of that attack if the switch was flipped?
If the order was given, the U.S. planned to launch roughly 2,300 different delivery systems, bombers, ICBMs, SLBM.
And how many warheads?
About 300-400 nuclear warheads, all delivered within a 28-hour window. And this force was programmed to hit almost 3,700 targets around the world.
3,700 targets. That seems like an unbelievable number. Were they all in the Soviet Union?
And this is maybe the single most horrifying detail in the entire plan.
Okay.
SIOP 62 didn't see the Soviet Union as a single country. It viewed the entire Sino-Soviet bloc as one single monolithic enemy.
Wait, you're saying the plan automatically included strikes on China?
Absolutely. The sources confirm it. In order to execute SIOP 62 meant that high-yield nuclear weapons would be hitting Beijing, Shanghai, and other Chinese industrial centers.
Even though China had absolutely nothing to do with putting missiles in Cuba.
Zero involvement. It was total war against an ideology, not just a nation. The logic was completely inflexible.
The philosophy was just overkill.
Overkill was the entire point. They would assign multiple warheads to a single target just to guarantee a 95 to 97% probability of destruction. This built-in redundancy ensured not only the destruction of military and industry, but also maximized radioactive fallout.
Unbelievable. Now let's bring it back to Cuba itself. Khrushchev's secret plan, Operation Anadyr. He puts the missiles in Cuba to put U.S. cities in the crosshairs. But the analysis points to a secret the U.S. didn't know at the time.
And this is the intelligence failure that almost ended the world. The U.S. had no idea that the Soviet commanders on the island, a man named General Isapliev, had what amounted to pre-delegated authority to use tactical nuclear weapons.
Tactical weapons, the smaller battlefield nukes.
Yes. We're talking short-range FROG missiles, nuclear cruise missiles, even nuclear landmines. The authority was a bit vague, but the understanding was clear. If communications with Moscow were cut, or if a full-scale U.S. invasion was imminent and looked like it would succeed.
Pliev could use his nukes to defend the island.
Without having to wait for a phone call from Khrushchev, this meant the invasion battlefield was nuclear from the very first minute.
And Kennedy's team had no idea.
None whatsoever.
So with these rigid plans and this delegated authority just sitting there, the Gemini analysis suggests the war starts not by declaration, but by accident.
By a breakdown in tactical control, yes. And the fuse is lit on October 27, 1962, a day that's now known as Black Saturday.
Black Saturday was already the most dangerous day of the crisis, even in our timeline.
It was a complete mess. In the real world, a Soviet SA-2 missile crew in Cuba shot down a U-2 spy plane, killing the pilot, Major Rudolf Anderson.
And they did that on their own authority, right? Khrushchev didn't order it.
No, the local Soviet commanders did it. And the real miracle of the crisis is that President Kennedy, who was under immense pressure from his generals to retaliate immediately, chose not to.
He absorbed that loss.
He absorbed it, and it kept the peace. But this is where our counterfactual scenario begins. The analysis says he could absorb one loss, but a second one would have been politically impossible.
So let's imagine that second incident. Maybe a low-level recon flight, and RF-101 Voodoo is flying low over Cuba.
And it gets ambushed. Not just shot down, but let's say both pilots are killed, and Castro's forces would recover the wreckage and maybe even put it on public display.
That would be a huge provocation.
The generals in the Pentagon, especially the hawks at SAC, would have been absolutely furious. They would have argued correctly that you cannot allow your pilots to be killed without consequence.
The political pressure would be unbearable.
Exactly. This second incident breaks the dam. Kennedy is forced to authorize O-Plan 312, which is a series of limited reprisal airstrikes. This is the prelude to the full invasion, O-Plan 316.
So the fuse is lit. But the actual nuclear detonation, the first one, it happens somewhere else.
It happens deep under the waves of the Atlantic. And this involves the Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine, B-59.
This is one of the most famous near misses in history.
It's the closest we ever came. The B-59 was being hunted by U.S. destroyers. The U.S. Navy was dropping small, non-lethal signaling depth charges, trying to force the sub to surface.
But the crew on the B-59 didn't know they were non-lethal.
Not at all. You have to picture the scene inside that sub. The air conditioning was broken, the temperature was over 50 degrees Celsius, the batteries were dying, CO2 levels were critical, they were exhausted, terrified, and they were convinced the war had already started.
And they had a nuclear weapon on board.
They had a T-5 nuclear torpedo, 10 kilotons, about two-thirds the yield of the Hiroshima bomb, and the U.S. Navy had no idea it was there.
In our timeline, one man, Vasily Arkhipov, prevented the launch.
Yes. Arkhipov was the flotilla's chief of staff, and he happened to be on that specific submarine. Soviet protocol required the captain and the political officer to agree on a launch, but Arkhipov's presence created a de facto three-man rule.
And he said no.
The captain, Valentin Savitsky, was screaming to fire the torpedo. Arkhipov calmly talked him down. He single-handedly saved the world.
So the counterfactual scenario hinges on Arkhipov not being there or just being overruled?
Exactly. Imagine Arkhipov isn't there, or in the heat and the stress, Captain Savitsky just ignores him and gives the order. Around 5 p.m. on Black Saturday, the B-59 fires.
What happens in that instant?
The 10-kiloton torpedo detonates. It instantly vaporizes the nearest U.S. destroyer, say the USS Coney. The blast and the shockwave cripple the entire battle group, which includes the aircraft carrier USS Randolph. A giant radioactive mushroom cloud of water and steam erupts from the ocean.
There is no ambiguity. This is a nuclear attack.
It is undeniable proof. At that point, any hope of de-escalation is just gone.
The news hits Washington.
DEFCON jumps immediately to 1. Imminent war. All political restraint is gone. Kennedy has no choice. He orders the immediate execution of O-Plan 316. The full invasion of Cuba is on for the morning of October 28th.
And the invasion force is sailing directly into that intelligence gap we talked about.
Straight into the trap. U.S. planners think they're facing a few thousand lightly armed Soviets. They have no idea they're about to attack an island defended by over 40,000 combat troops who are armed with and authorized to use tactical nuclear weapons.
So October 28th, invasion morning, the U.S. Marines hit the beaches.
And they meet resistance that is just astronomically fiercer than they expected. They're fighting a conventional battle, but the Soviet forces on the ground, having seen the nuclear explosion at sea the day before, believe they are already in a total nuclear war.
And their commander, General Pliev, sees his conventional forces starting to buckle under the American assault.
He knows he's facing defeat, And with the understanding that the nuclear threshold has already been crossed, he does what he was authorized to do. He uses his battlefield nukes.
This is what the analysis calls the nuclear Pearl Harbor.
It's the second and final trigger.
Yeah.
Pliev unleashes his tactical nuclear arsenal. We're talking about short-range FROG missiles, each carrying a 2-kiloton warhead, landing right in the middle of the U.S. troop concentrations on the beaches.
My God.
And at the same time, his FKR-1 cruise missiles, with 12-kiloton warheads, are launched at the amphibious fleet just offshore.
The destruction must be just immediate and absolute.
It is pure carnage. Tens of thousands of American soldiers are vaporized or burned or killed by radiation in seconds. The invasion just stops. Ships are sunk. The entire operation is a catastrophic failure.
And back in Washington, this news comes in. The Soviets have used nuclear weapons on U.S. ground troops.
Any last shred of restraint is gone. It's over. The assumption has to be that this is a coordinated, all-out Soviet attack.
So the president gives the order.
Execute SIOP 62. The full strategic plan.
Let's walk through that exchange. What happens first from the U.S. side?
The immediate response in the first 30 minutes is the launch of the ICBMs. The liquid-fueled Atlas and Titan I missiles lift off.
What are their targets?
They're aimed at known Soviet missile silos, command and control centers, and of course Moscow. They're the decapitation strike, using those massive 9-megaton warheads to compensate for their poor accuracy.
But that's not the main attack.
No. The main wave of destruction comes hours later. Between T+4 and T+10 hours, the huge fleet of B-52 and B-47 bombers arrives. They've flown from bases in the U.S., the U.K., Spain. Their job is to systematically carpet the entire Soviet industrial heartland with thermonuclear weapons.
This is the saturation attack.
This is the attack that destroys the country.
And we have to come back to that horrifying detail in SIOP 62 about China.
Yes. The plan is automatic. The targets are pre-programmed, so as the bombers are hitting the USSR, other bombers and missiles are striking Beijing, Shanghai, and other major Chinese targets.
Killing hundreds of millions of people who had nothing to do with the crisis.
Wiping them off the map. It's just part of the plan.
So what about the Soviet response? They detect this massive launch coming at them.
Their early warning systems go off. They know they have minutes before their own vulnerable ICBMs are destroyed in their silos. It's the ultimate use-it-or-lose-it moment.
So Khrushchev gives the order.
Khrushchev, the high command, whoever's left alive, they launch everything they possibly can. Maybe a dozen, maybe 20 of their R-7 ICBMs successfully get off the ground, aimed at cities like New York, Washington, and Chicago.
But their main retaliatory strike is aimed at the hostage.
It's aimed at Europe. Hundreds of their reliable R-12 and R-14 medium-range missiles are launched from bases in the western USSR.
And they obliterate Western Europe.
Completely. London, Paris, Bonn, Rome, every NATO headquarters, every U.S. airbase. The analysis is unanimous on this point. Within the first few hours of the exchange, Western Europe as a modern industrial civilization simply ceases to exist.
And what about the missiles in Cuba?
Any of the R-12s in Cuba that survived the initial U.S. airstrikes are launched as a final act of revenge. They hit the American South and the East Coast. Washington, D.C., Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans, all hit with 1-megaton warheads.
When the dust settles from this initial exchange, what does the human cost look like? The immediate deaths from blast, fire, and radiation.
The cost for the Sino-Soviet bloc it's total. The saturation bombing means somewhere between 200 and 350 million people are killed in the first 2 months.
200 to 350 million.
That's 80 to 90% of the urban population. Gone. The entire state, the military, the industry. It's all been systematically erased.
And Europe.
Western Europe, because it was targeted so heavily by those Soviet MRBMs, suffers around 100 to 150 million deaths, a mortality rate of over 70%. It's just gone.
And the United States, the country that won the military exchange,
still suffers a catastrophic blow. The estimates are lower, maybe 20 to 40 million direct deaths.
A flubber.
Because the Soviet ICBM force was so small. But those hits are concentrated on the most densely populated and important areas. The entire eastern seaboard, the financial centers, the government in D.C.
So even with fewer deaths, the country is functionally decapitated.
The United States, as a coherent, functioning nation-state, is destroyed, even if more of its landmass is untouched compared to the USSR.
It's almost impossible to get your head around those numbers. But the analysis makes it clear that this is only the beginning. The real planet-wide catastrophe is what happens next.
This is where it gets really interesting and truly terrifying. We move from a war to a genuine extinction-level event.
And it's all because of the specific types of weapons used in 1962.
Exactly. These weren't the smaller, more surgical warheads of the later Cold War. These were enormous, dirty, high-yield megaton bombs.
Yeah.
And their primary destructive effect, beyond the blast, was heat.
Immense thermal energy.
A multi-megaton weapon detonating over a city like Moscow doesn't just knock buildings down. It ignites a firestorm.
A firestorm. What is that exactly?
It's an uncontrollable, self-sustaining fire that can cover hundreds of square miles. It creates its own wind system, sucking in oxygen at hurricane speeds. The temperatures at the center can melt steel. It's a thermodynamic event.
And these firestorms, burning in hundreds of cities across the northern hemisphere, they're the engine of the climate disaster.
They are. Because they burn so hot and with such energy, they pump millions upon millions of tons of fine black carbon soot directly into the stratosphere.
And up in the stratosphere, there's no rain to wash it out.
None. So it just stays up there for years, spreading around the globe. It essentially becomes a planetary shroud.
A sunblocker.
A very effective one. The models, based on this 1962 scenario, predict this soot layer would block 70 to 80% of sunlight from reaching the surface in the northern hemisphere. Even the southern hemisphere would see a 30 to 40% reduction.
Which immediately triggers a nuclear autumn, which then deepens into a full-blown nuclear winter.
It's a drastic, multi-year, global cooling event. Average planetary temperatures drop by about 8 degrees Celsius. But the key is what happens in the continental interiors, the world's breadbaskets, North America, Europe, Russia.
What happens there?
Summer temperatures fall below freezing for years. The growing season is eliminated.
So agriculture just stops.
Complete agricultural collapse in the northern hemisphere for at least 3 to 5 years, which leads to the inevitable consequence, global famine.
So the initial blasts kill hundreds of millions.
And the subsequent starvation kills billions. The billions who survived the exchange, especially in places like India or Africa that weren't targeted, now face a world without food.
But the environmentalist effects are even more insidious. There's another killer that these big 1962-era bombs create.
Yes, the silent killer, the destruction of the ozone layer.
How does a nuclear bomb do that?
When a multi-megaton bomb's fireball forms, it's so hot it literally cooks the air. It creates huge quantities of nitrogen oxides, an ozone axis. These chemicals are shot up into the stratosphere along with the soot.
And Nosax destroys ozone.
Very effectively. The simulations for this scenario show a global ozone layer depletion of between 50 and 75%.
So you have this terrifying 1-2 punch.
It's a nightmare sequence. For a few years, the planet is dark and freezing under the soot cloud. But while that's happening, the ozone layer is being eaten away. Then, as the soot finally starts to settle, the sun comes back out.
But there's no filter anymore.
No filter. The surface of the Earth is bombarded with lethal levels of UVB radiation.
What does that do to any survivors?
It causes immediate snow blindness, it causes soaring rates of aggressive skin cancer, and it kills plants. Any attempts to restart agriculture would fail because the crops would be sterilized by the radiation. It attacks the very foundation of the food chain.
And on top of all that, you have the persistent radioactive contamination.
Right. There's the immediate, intense fallout that kills you with acute radiation syndrome. But the long-term problem is isotopes like strontium-90 and cesium-137. They get into the soil, into the water, and they stay there for decades, working their way up the food chain.
We have data from the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on what this does long term.
We do. The Hibakusha. Their data shows that about 60% of the later deaths among survivors were from various forms of cancer caused by their radiation exposure.
And in this post-apocalyptic world, there are no hospitals, no cancer treatments.
No diagnostics, no chemotherapy, no pain medication. It's a global health crisis that no surviving community could possibly handle.
So let's fast forward. 10 years have passed. It's 1972 in this alternate timeline. What's left of the Northern Hemisphere? What's left of the United States, Europe, the Soviet Union?
The term the analysis uses is a radioactive pre-industrial necropolis, a city of the dead.
So it's just empty.
The entire industrial engine of the 20th century has been annihilated. The population is down by 70, 80, maybe 90%.
And the people who are left, the survivors, what are they doing? Are they rebuilding?
There's no capacity to rebuild. They've been forced into a total civilizational regression. They're living in small, isolated, scattered communities. It's a subsistent agrarian lifestyle, scavenging primitive farming and contaminated soil, trying to survive in a much colder, much harsher world.
So ideas like the United States of America or the Soviet Union, they're just gone.
Completely meaningless concepts. The central governments were wiped out in the first hours. Power has devolved entirely.
To what?
The analysis projects a breakdown into what it calls cacicazgos, local warlords. Maybe a surviving military unit takes over a town, or a particularly violent gang controls a river. They control the scarce resources, clean water, canned food, medicine, fuel. The rule of law is gone. It's feudalism, but with radiation.
And what about technology? How far back are they thrown?
Back to the mid-19th century, in practical terms, because the whole system is broken. You might find a working car, but there's no gasoline. You might find a hospital, but there are no antibiotics being manufactured. A simple pump breaks in a water purification system, and you can't get a replacement part because the factory that made it is a radioactive crater 1,000 miles away.
So knowledge is lost.
The practical application of knowledge is lost. It becomes a world of salvage and improvisation.
Okay, now let's look south. The Southern Hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, South Africa, they weren't hit by the bombs. Do they become the new global superpowers?
They are the inheritors of the Earth, but what they inherit is a ruined planet. Their survival is incredibly precarious.
They weren't bombed. Why is their situation so bad?
Because their crisis isn't war, it's total and instantaneous economic collapse.
Wow.
Because their entire economic system was completely dependent on the North. In a single day, they lose 95% of their export markets. They lose all their sources for technology, for medicine, for spare parts.
So a tractor in Argentina breaks down?
And it never runs again. A hospital's x-ray machine fails, and it becomes a useless piece of junk. The entire global financial system evaporates. Their currencies become worthless. They are plunged into a permanent, inescapable Great Depression.
So they are forced into self-sufficiency. Autarky.
Exactly, forced autarky. They have to desperately try to build their own industries using whatever obsolete technology they have on hand, trying to make their own basic medicines, their own simple farm tools. Living standards just plummet.
And they must be facing a massive humanitarian crisis from the north. Refugees.
This is one of the grimmest parts of the projection. You'd have desperate survivors from the north trying to flee south on boats. But the southern nations are dealing with their own nightmare.
The climate change. Crop failures.
Exactly. They're dealing with global cooling, widespread food shortages, and their own collapsing societies. They can't support their own populations, let alone millions of starving, irradiated refugees.
So they close their borders?
They militarize their borders. The analysis suggests they would use violence to suppress migration, turning away ships to protect what little they have left. It's a brutal calculation of survival.
So by 1972, what is the health of the population in the South?
It's dire. They are dealing with the long-term effects of global fallout in their food chain, plus the damaged ozone layer. So you have rising cancer rates, UV-induced blindness, and with the collapse of sanitation and modern medicine, old diseases come roaring back. Tuberculosis, cholera. Life expectancy, even in the lucky countries, is projected to fall dramatically, maybe to between 35 and 50 years.
So there's no new superpower. No one rises from the ashes to lead the world.
No. The world of 1972 is an archipelago of surviving nations, a collection of isolated, struggling states. Australia and New Zealand are probably the most stable, just due to their isolation and their ability to feed themselves. South America is likely a mess of internal conflicts and resource wars.
So the final brutal lesson from this entire deep dive seems to be that in 1962, our technology was powerful enough to destroy civilization.
But our control systems, SIOP 62, the chains of command, the battlefield delegations, they were just too primitive, too rigid, and too fragile to stop the collapse once the first shot was fired.
The margin between the world we have and total annihilation was just razor thin.
It was, and the analysis is crystal clear on the outcome. It wouldn't have been a war with a winner and a loser. It would have been a prolonged, decades-long act of civilizational suicide that destroyed the North and left the South crippled for generations.
Well, we were much, much closer to the end than we generally like to remember. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.